This week's lecture is about writing to make the world a better place. The world without writing. Before writing and reading were invented, people passed down their knowledge orally from one generation to the next. They would just tell the next generation what they believed that they should know. And of course, that knowledge was subject to the ability of the person who told the stories. And sometimes the stories would change in the telling from one generation to another. And so it was really hard to share knowledge from one generation to the other that way. And they did, though, embed history in stories or poems. And some of those stories and poems were performed in public, like plays. Two examples like that were the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were based on the Trojan War in ancient times. And there are still historians and archaeologists trying to tell for sure if the Trojan War happened, if it really happened the way the stories say they did. But during those times and hundreds of years after, there was still not a method of writing those stories. So bards or poets would go and perform every year or every few years, and people would come from miles around to hear those stories. And that's how they learned about history. And then writing was invented. The first form of writing was not quite like what we have now. It was called cuneiform, and it was actually used for business transactions first. So you might even say that accountants and writers both worked together to invent writing. And so cuneiform was actually on clay tablets, and those clay tablets were impressed upon with sticks while they were still wet, and then they would dry, and that's how they would keep their business records. And then around the same time or a little bit later, the ancient Egyptians developed that hieroglyphic form of writing, the pictographs. You've probably seen that type of writing with the kings and the animals and the birds, and the symbols that were also telling a story. And you've probably seen those in movies like The Mummy. And so hieroglyphics were a very important step in writing. And then people were writing in more like the type of writing we're used to now in alphabets. And so you didn't really have a pictograph to show what the image was or the story was. It was more like letters that went together to make sounds to represent language. And that writing makes it possible for knowledge to be stored in libraries or shared over the generations or shared with neighboring cities or countries. Also, one thing that's happened as people have learned to write is that people's memories have changed. Now we don't have to remember everything. We can write it down. Or as you know, we're already in the midst of another revolution in language and in knowledge. And now we don't have to remember anything because we can Google it. So writing was that kind of revolution, and now we're kind of in the middle of another one. But the first writing with alphabets that symbolized sounds that brought together the ideas and words, those were written by scribes. They were not printed. They were certainly not on screens. And those were written by scribes who were more educated than most of their fellow citizens. Most people did not know how to read or write in ancient times or the Middle Ages, also called the Dark Ages by some people. And then there were manuscripts at those times that were works of art. And so this link here on this page would take you to a lovely set of images of what the illustrated manuscripts look like. And then another very important step came. It was the printing press. And the printing press was invented at least 500 years ago. There's much more information here if you click on the links. And it made books and knowledge much more available to a much larger audience. And people who were not wealthy, who were not of the ruling class, were able to learn more and pass that knowledge around more generally. The Gutenberg Bible was the first, of the books that were printed on the printing press that we know of. And there's still samples of the Gutenberg Bible left. If you click on these links, you can see what the Gutenberg Bible looks like. Of course, it's in a very secure glass case, the one that we have here in this link, and it's a piece of history, and it's also very inspirational because when the Gutenberg Bible came out, it allowed people who were not necessarily who had not necessarily ever seen the actual Bible. Usually people would go to church and they would hear about the Bible and possibly see one from a distance, but the Gutenberg Bible and later Bibles made it possible for regular citizens to have access to a Bible or even to have their own, instead of waiting years for for a scribe or a set of scribes to make one for them, which would be incredibly expensive. And then here's a list of some works of literature that have changed the world, including the Gutenberg Bible, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. And at this link, which you could see if you go to the PowerPoint presentation itself, is a list of 50 literary works that have changed the course of history. And then you might be wondering, well, what does this have to do with us? For one thing, writing and reading are a crucial part of an education. As you've learned from this class and every class you've ever taken at the university or high school or earlier level, it's very important to read and to write. And the more you read, the better your writing gets. And also, you can learn during the writing process. It's been proven by several studies that people who write papers actually learn more in a class than those who don't, which is probably why many of your classes at SLU will include writing a paper. You can teach your audience what you know. Good writing can help you advance your career. And then many jobs do require that people are able to communicate with their coworkers and their customers at all levels. And so writing can also help us change the world. If you've seen the recent movie about Charles Dickens when he was writing the book A Christmas Carol, it's very interesting. And so you could maybe look that up. It might be available on Netflix now. And that book was about a man who was heartless and rich and didn't care about anybody. And it literally changed the way people thought about Christmas, and also really helped make things better for people who were less fortunate. And the book sold out very quickly too, so Dickens made a lot of money in his time, so there's always that as well. And then there was All Quiet on the Western Front, which is about the horrors of warfare. And then the book 1984 has become very popular again. It's about the dangers of Big Brother, where the TV watches the people, and as well as they are watching the television. And then Maya Angelou's poetry and autobiographies are wonderful and energetic and also very thoughtful, and you might find those very interesting yourself. And so how could you change the world with words? Just giving a kind word to someone. I know someone who every time she buys a product, and if it's not satisfactory, she writes the company, and she usually writes the president or the vice president of the company, and she's gotten some very nice packages of goodies for that. And also they were aware that they were not producing a product that was satisfactory. You can support an idea in which you believe. You can write your own stories and poetry, not only to express yourself, but also possibly to influence the world. There are some cautions though. Take care in the digital viral world. Anything you write could possibly be read by anyone, anywhere, especially Twitter or Instagram. Not everyone agrees with you. However, it's best if you can try to or do respect the views of others, because if you respect others, they will be much more likely to respect you.